Idaho Israel Alliance is excited to present Gem State to Holy Land, a quarterly web series dedicated to providing interesting and insightful thoughts and ideas from around the pro-Israel and Jewish world. And here is our host, the founder of the Idaho Israel Alliance, Don Berger. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. I'm Moshe Herman, the Executive Director of the Idaho Israel Alliance, and I'm excited to have you join us for Gem State to Holy Land, our first live web series. And joining us today is Rabbi Nolan Lebovitz from, go ahead, take it, Don.
Valley-based Shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Moshe, and thank you for so much hard work over the past few days, not just in setting this event up, but also responding in real time to the what's been going on in Idaho. This week I was really proud of Idaho for stepping up and saying no to even something that's perceived as hate. I don't have to go into what the details are. You can look it up, but really glad that was resolved. So welcome, Rabbi Lebovitz.
It's great to be here. It's great to be visiting Idaho.
Excited to have you on. I finished your book a few days ago, and I don't know if I can call you my rabbi because you're like in LA and we haven't met in person, but you're converting my wife and daughter. So I don't know. I consider you our primary rabbi. I'm going to read your bio real quick, if you don't mind, and then just so our audience gets a sense of who you are. So bear with me. It's quite an impressive background. Rabbi Nolan Lebovitz serves as the senior rabbi at Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California. The horrific massacre of October 7th and its aftermath around the world prompted him to begin speaking out about the next chapter of Jewish life. His first book, which we will discuss today, The Case for Dual Loyalty, Healing the Divided Soul of American Jews, challenges the oldest taboo in the long history of the Jewish diaspora. It argues that proudly declaring Jewish loyalty forges a new path forward, imbued with pride of peoplehood and collective destiny. In 2024, he earned his PhD from Claremont Graduate University's Religious Department, focusing on the study of the Hebrew Bible. That same year, he accepted a position as an adjunct fellow at our friend Zach Bodner's Z3 Institute, which is part of the Palo Alto Z3 project, in helping to develop the next stage of Jewish life. A Fulbright scholar, Lebovitz spent time in 2023 studying at Bar-Ilan University in Israel. He wrote and directed two documentaries, Roadmap Jerusalem in 2018 and Roadmap Genesis in 2015. He was ordained with a master's degree from American Jewish University Zeigler School of Rabbinic Studies in 2016. I can keep going, but I'm going to stop right there. Rabbi Lebovitz, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Don. Thank you for coordinating all this, Moshe.
So I want to start with like page -1 of your book, which is the quote you have from Numbers 32:6.
First of all, there's Roman numerals at the top. It's very Jewish. It's very Jewish to see it as -1. That page. That's a preface. But go ahead. I'll excuse it just for the start.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
It's good to know that Jews in Idaho behave the same way as Jews in Los Angeles.
Yeah,
Let's go with the -1. Yes, go ahead.
We will honor the page numbers.
Yes.
So it's written, and Moses said to the tribes of Gad and Reuben, "Will your brothers go to war inside the land while you live here?" Numbers 32:6. Why did you start with that quote?
Because I believe that, listen, most rabbis have the same story of how October 7th unfolded for each of us personally. It was Shmini Atzeret, it was Shabbos here, and it's a day that I usually don't answer my cell phone. My cell phone was, off the hook, ringing and ringing and ringing. My wife's, we believed that something was not usual about it. We looked, we couldn't believe our own eyes. We turned on the television, and it was people close to us telling us that what was going on in Israel. Came to the synagogue, and I think we had a profound misunderstanding of what was going on. On October 7th, we believed that there was a terrorist organization that was waging war on the state of Israel in the southern region. And that was an extremely myopic way of looking at what happened. That was the best understanding we had at the moment. Looking back on it, it was a part of a global effort to bring jihad against the Jewish people all over the world. And that is the only way you can explain the pro-terror marches that were happening across this country and across the globe in major cities days after October 7th, before Israel had an opportunity to respond. There was already a coordinated effort of Jew hatred and libelous smearing of the state of Israel. So I think that Jews around the world began to open our eyes, and we all had this primal instinct to come to Israel's support, to send Israel whatever it needed in that moment. There was a call that IDF soldiers didn't have socks. There was a call that IDF soldiers didn't have what they needed. There were families that needed support while they were displaced, while they were seeking refuge in different regions of Israel. And that primal instinct of Jews in the diaspora to come to help Jews in the land of Israel, that primal instinct is a commandment that Moses gives us in the Torah. And I'm proud to think that in the last 500 plus days of war, Jews have fulfilled that kind of primordial promise that we made to Moses and to God, that even while we stay outside of the land of Israel, whenever our brothers and sisters cry out that they need help, we answer them. The challenge, the thesis of this book, let's just say, is that I actually think that what the last 500 plus days have taught us about this, from this war, from this conflict, is one of the lessons that we can draw is that there is no distinction anymore between my children and the children in the land of Israel. There's no distinction between Jews here and Jews there. There has to be a loyalty to Jews everywhere. There has to be a prioritization of peoplehood in the way that we view our Jewish identity.
So why did you start? Why is chapter 4 the case for dual loyalty? And why did you choose to lay out a 4-step framework, which starts with historic patterns of the diaspora, which is followed by problem of dual loyalty, then the Jewish double helix, and finally the case for dual loyalty? Why not just write about dual loyalty? You just made sense. Why not just start with that?
So for the same reason that we say that the book begins on page -1, -1, you have to start with the problem in a Jewish book rather than starting with the solution, right? Because the glass is half empty. First of all, I knew that the title would be challenging for people, right? Yeah. I knew that the title would be challenging. It's not surprising because the charge of dual loyalty has been an accusation that we have done our best to avoid for 2,000 years. And so I know that this would be, provocative and controversial, and I need to acknowledge all of those things. I need to explain to people that I understand what they're feeling when they pick up the book. The other thing I needed to explain is that the experience of diaspora is nothing new. I needed to place it in a larger framework for people to understand. And one of the things I keep doing in the book, because I'm a rabbi, but also because I'm a student of the Jewish tradition, not only a teacher of the Jewish tradition, a student of the Jewish tradition, is I look for books that give us wisdom and guidance, and thank God we have one in all of our communities that lay out all of the stages and all of the answers that we're looking for. We put it in the ark, and it's called the Torah. And so what I did in the beginning is I laid out the 6 stages of diaspora to explain that basically the thing that we don't like to talk about in the diaspora is that every diaspora before us has ended.
Yeah, and just for our listeners, step 1 is finding acceptance and success in a new place. Step 2 is being welcome to that place. Step 3 is the foreign society notices a success and is a little concerned. Step 4 is the society begins to implement new treatment of Jews. Step 5 is the host society attempts to destroy the Jews. And step 6 is sweeping anti-Semitic destructive explosion takes place, and we need to collectively survive.
Right. So I lay it out through the end of the book of Genesis, from the end of the book of Genesis through the beginning of Exodus, to show the diaspora experience of Egypt in terms of Joseph and his brothers descending to Egypt, and the slavery experience, and then of course the redemption out. I use that to kind of exhibit all 6 stages of diaspora. And then I go on to explain that this diaspora, these 6 stages, have repeated again and again and again throughout our experience, whether that is, one of the examples I use is Spain, right? So 100 years before the Inquisition and the expulsion in 1492, there was a massive pogrom in 1391. And so there were these kind of tremors that this was coming. There were tremors that pointed to the final explosion of energy, of the earthquake. I hate to use a California analogy for everybody in Idaho, but there are tremors that lead to earthquakes. And I guarantee you that the families who walked out of Spain, right, in their Fiddler on the Roof wagons, just to mix time periods for everybody, when those Spanish families walked out, they had thought, like, they can't believe, they were in disbelief that this could have possibly happened in a place as modern as Spain, after the golden age of Spanish Judaism, not fully comprehending that there was, a tremor 100 years earlier, a massive pogrom that killed and murdered and raped the Jewish community, and that they had ample warning. And so the question is that I pose in chapter 1 is, right, how is this diaspora the same and how is it different? How's it the same and how's it different? And then in chapter 2, I talk about the problem of dual loyalty and how we got to this place. How we got to this place is a diaspora, an unrelenting experience of thousands of years of diaspora, and making the same choice over and over and over again. And I would argue making the wrong choice over and over and over again. And so I use the 19th century France to prove my point. And I kind of pick an episode from the beginning and an episode from the end. And I think actually the most surprising part of so many friends reading the book is how many educated, involved Jews come back to me after reading the book and saying they had no idea. They weren't in any way familiar with the significance of 19th century France. And so 19th century France begins with kind of the dawn of modernity, right? So you're talking about 19th century is the 1800s. So any class in a university begins the Enlightenment or modernity or whatever it might be with the French Revolution. The French Revolution, the promise of, liberty, equality, fraternity, that promise kind of moves through a reign of terror and ends with a military emperor, Napoleon Bonaparte, right? The great Napoleon, not so much in terms of size, but in terms of stature. And he actually sets out to conquer the world. And in doing so, he has this crazy idea that maybe Jews deserve emancipation. And so he opens up the ghettos, the shtetls all across Europe, and he says, Jews can come out. Now, my question is, should Jews deserve citizenship? Can a Jew be a loyal citizen of a country? Right. And he gathers all of the Jewish leaders of France together, and they form a group called the French Sanhedrin. The Assembly of Notables, we refer to it as the French Sanhedrin. And that's led by Rabbi David Sinsheim. Now, that group sets out to answer all sorts of questions about how Jewish identity would work in a modern society. And their outlook is to justify a Jewish place in a modern society, to explain ourselves that we could fit in. And there are exceptions to that rule. Rabbi Sinsheim explains that, we would have to still keep Jewish law when it comes to Jewish marriages and Jewish divorces and life cycles and burial and all kinds of, but it comes down to several questions. And one of them is, what do Jews mean at the end of the Passover Seder when we say next year in Jerusalem? How could we live in one place and be loyal citizens of that one place and aspire that next year we might be in Jerusalem?
And it's part of the Shemona Esrei too.
It's part of the Shemona Esrei too, right? So it's part of we talk about Jerusalem multiple times a day in our prayers. We talk about it during every grace after meal. We talk about Jerusalem endlessly in our liturgy. So lucky or unlucky for Rabbi Sinsheim, we never really got to justify our place into French society because Napoleon Bonaparte lost control, right? And in doing so, Europe decided this was a terrible idea. Let's push all the Jews back into the ghettos and lock the door for as long as possible. So we lost the opportunity. We lost the opportunity in Europe to be emancipated and to be considered equal citizens. Now, slowly but surely, as modernity continues, some Jews do get out and join society. So let's say 1805, 1806, 1807 was the French Sanhedrin. That's the beginning of the 19th century. At the end of the 19th century, in 1895, a Jewish officer in the French military is on trial in France for treason. And there's absolutely no evidence against him. It's a kangaroo court, and of course they find him guilty. And his name is Alfred Dreyfus. And when Alfred Dreyfus is found guilty, he exclaims, "Long live France." Even after France and French society had put him up on trial at a kangaroo court to be a scapegoat, to be the ultimate Jew who is the scapegoat for their problems, they strip him of his medals and all of his honors, and they convict him to send him to prison, and he still wants to pronounce his loyalty to France. He is no different than the French Sanhedrin that began the century. The difference is that according to legend, according to the narrative, there was a young reporter standing in the crowd watching this unfold. And when they convicted Dreyfus and he screamed, "Long live France," the crowd erupted in a chant, "Death to the Jews." Not death to Dreyfus, death to the Jews. And in that crowd, that journalist noted it, and that journalist scratched his head and wondered how it is that Jews could ever justify their way into a society if we're constantly scapegoated and othered and maligned. And that reporter's name was Theodor Herzl. And he changed the narrative for the next century, because only not many years later, months later, he released his book, The Jewish State, that changed history. So if you look at that century just as a framework, you understand that the framework had to be broken by somebody who said, "I'm not going to play by these rules any longer," where you ask if I can justify my citizenship, and then I try to justify my citizenship. That Jews can't actually play that game because it never works for us. Now we have to ask ourselves, why has that never occurred in this country? What's special about this country? What's different about this country? Well, I actually think...
Or, by the way, 45% of the Jewish population lives here.
Right. So about approximately 90% of global Jewry lives either in Israel or the United States, and that percentage is only going to increase as France empties out its Jews, and Britain empties out its Jews, and Canada empties out its Jews, and life becomes more challenging in those places. They're only going to move to one of two places. And the question is, what is different? Is the United States staged for the same 6 steps of diaspora? Is it possible that we would ever see an explosion, a final explosion of anti-Semitism in an aftermath? And I think actually the answer is no. I believe that the United States is different. It's different for several reasons. First, we never had to justify our place here in this country. We've always been part of the narrative of the United States of America, right? In Chicago, that's where I grew up, in Chicago, we would take a field trip downtown. There's a famous statue of George Washington standing there with his arm around Chaim Solomon, right? The gentleman who financed the Revolutionary War, gave everything that he had, all of his relationships, all of his resources, to the Revolutionary Army, and died in poverty, died impoverished as a result. He is one of the heroes, and that statue was defaced in the weeks following October 7th, right? That statue was defaced. Now, my argument is, to deface the statue, you're defacing George Washington as much as you're defacing Chaim Solomon. And that's the secret to this country. The secret to this country is that the Jewish narrative has always been part of the American narrative. Jews have always been part of it. We never had to justify our place here to anybody. As a matter of fact, George Washington visits a synagogue early on in his career, right, the Torah synagogue, and the president of the synagogue writes him a beautiful letter thanking him for coming, and pledges loyalty to George Washington in the letter, right? The congregation loves him and pledges our loyalty. And George Washington graciously, magnanimously, he actually corrects him and says, don't pledge your loyalty to me, pledge your loyalty to the United States of America. In this country, all children of Abraham will have opportunity to live together. And in doing so, he changes the way that American Jews ought to behave. He explains that we're not outsiders here trying our best to fit in. We are profoundly American. I've never once in my life, never once, ever doubted my Americanism. I've never once. And so anybody who would have the audacity to stand on a college campus and tell Jews that they are not allowed to walk into the library up those steps, right? They are not only attacking American Jews, they're attacking the promise of America itself. And all you have to do is juxtapose two different scenes that happened in this country, juxtapose the campus at Harvard University against the campus, I believe it was Ole Miss. Somebody who was at a previous talk said that they thought it was North Carolina. Either way, the examples are still good. But at Harvard University, during the protests, the students protesting, right? Those like disgusting, filthy tent dwellers, they went to the center of campus and they lowered the American flag and they raised up a Palestinian flag.
So
the Palestinian flag represents the antithesis to everything that this country stands for. It represents the antithesis to Western civilization.
Yeah.
It represents antithesis to the morals and values that Western civilization has set forth as our guiding path. And nobody stopped it. At Ole Miss, University of Mississippi, the same thing was tried.
Oh, I've seen that video.
The same thing was tried.
Yes.
As they approached the flagpole to draw down the American flag and raise up the Palestinian flag, fraternity guys ran to the flagpole, linked arms, and explained that they would not allow anybody to approach the flagpole, that they were willing to fight to prevent anybody from reaching the flagpole. They stood in front of the symbol of this country because what they represented in doing that was something far greater than defending a piece of cloth. It was actually defending the set of values that make us American. And by doing so, they said that stuff that's happening up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, it's not going to make its way down here. It's not going to make its way down here. And in doing so, I have to tell you, they also assured an entire Jewish community, those college kids, whether they realized it or not, that we have friends. And we've always had friends in this country. And just because the loudest, most obnoxious, most toxic elements of society decide to march across campuses in New York City or Los Angeles or Chicago or the downtowns of San Francisco or whatever it might be, the majority of this country has stood behind the state of Israel beginning on October 7th. They've always stood behind the state of Israel because the relationship between the United States and Israel is not solely based on Jewish population. It's based on shared values and foundational aspirations for what we want out of life.
Thank you for sharing so much of that history. It's fascinating. You mentioned Palestinians. I'm going to go there for a second. I don't recall reading the word Palestinian anywhere in your book.
I think I refer to Palestinian factions in the book.
Okay.
But I mean, I refer to Hamas and terror organizations and all of that. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I want to just, double click on that because the Jewish community, by the way, what you said is exactly right. And that's why the Idaho Israel Alliance exists. 80% of our over 1,000 members are not Jewish. I do believe most Americans are Zionist. If they know about it, and if they don't, if you explain it, they'll be Zionist. So,
I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah. So how do you reconcile many Jews disagreeing with you and the rift that currently exists, especially, and by the way, when we posted the event, one of our members said, "Oh my gosh, I wish Rabbi Nolan would move to Idaho and open a conservative synagogue."
Well, I think I'm going to be in LA
Yeah, well,
for my life, but for the rest of my career certainly. But
retirement.
but maybe I'd love to visit Idaho and meet all the folks up there.
We'd love that.
That's
Well,
for
you have
sure.
plenty of expat community here in
Yeah, I
Idaho.
believe
It's
it.
a lot of Californians, so you'd fit right in.
I know
That
that
was
I know that we have some of our own synagogue moved there during COVID, and we miss all of you greatly, and I'm glad that you found a place to be. But
And just to be clear for everybody on the call, not a single family, with the exception of a worker, was impacted by the fires. Is that right? I
there
mean,
were
directly lost a home.
directly lost home. So there were people who lost. There was a couple who lost vacation homes. Nobody lost their home. Most of the congregation was evacuated. For several days, it got really scary as the fires got close. But we're geographically in the valley, and most of the fire damage happened in the city for the Palisades fire and in Malibu, and for the Pasadena fire happened in Eaton in the Pasadena side. Terrible. I mean, my wife, when she graduated college, she worked for Teach for America for 6 years.
Yeah.
And she and the school that she worked at in Altadena was burnt down, and so there's no there's LA will be devastated for years to come. It's hard to explain to people the scope and scale of the devastation. Two solid Manhattans next to each other has burned down, totally devastated, and I don't know what happens to the city or population. It's difficult. My job is to try to take care of as many people as I can.
Yeah. And there are over, I think, 1,200 families in your congregation, just so everybody's aware.
Correct.
So let's talk about this Jewish question. For those who don't know, there are basically three denominations in Judaism. There's Orthodox, there's Conservative, there's Reform, and it's the same order of the strictness of adherence to the religion. And so how do you reconcile the difference in Jewish opinions on the Palestinian question?
Right. So I don't know what you mean by the Palestinian question. I know you mean, or I would assume you mean the two-state solution.
I mean, the support that exists sometimes more so to the non-Jewish side.
So I think we're moving faster and faster towards a post-denominational world where I don't think it matters as much if someone is Reform, Conservative, or Orthodox, but what they believe. And so I'll answer the question in this way. I think all Jews need to understand that there is no going back to being October 6th Jews. There's no going back. So we are different in many ways because of the experience of October 7th. One of the ways that we're different, that I believe we're different, is that the solutions that we had been trying for, let's say, 30 years or so, namely the Oslo Accords, that is broken, right? And there's no way to put that back together. So we need to start thinking of new ideas. Now, it makes Jewish community uncomfortable to not have a solution. I just came back from AIPAC in DC, and there were Israeli speakers, diplomats there talking about how they really think that it's the American inside of us that requires a solution to everything. Because most diplomats from most countries don't think that every problem has a solution. They work in the shades of gray, meaning to say, can Israel provide 5% more security for itself rather than being entirely secure? Because they're not sure that they could ever be entirely secure. Could it be 5% safer, 10% safer, 15% safer? And I think that here in the American community, there are Jews who want to go back to October 6th. They want to close their eyes and they want to go back and they want to say, we can just put the glass back together. The broken glass, the shards of broken glass, we can just glue it back together. I think that it can never be glued back together. It can never be glued back together. So I think that we need really, this is time for the best and brightest minds to start thinking of solutions that haven't been tried before, to think about solutions outside of the box. I don't know if there's ever going to be a Riviera created out of Gaza. I don't know if there are ever going to be hotels. I don't know if there's going to be a golf course, Trump Casino and all that stuff. But I know that it's not a crazy exercise to start thinking outside the box right now. I know that's what's required. And I also know it makes Jews uncomfortable. It makes Jews uncomfortable to think outside the box. It made Jews uncomfortable following the Shoah that certain Jews wanted to move and fight for a Jewish state. Not all Jews were behind that. It makes Jews uncomfortable to do something different.
Right.
And I think it's actually
Daniel Gordis
precisely
talks well about this in his book, Israel, that you recommended to me.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. A great book everybody should read is Israel, A Concise History of a Nation Reborn, right? Anything but concise, but terrific. And
Classic Jew.
classic Jew. And I think it's time that we start entertaining new ideas. And that means that we can't be bound to previous failures, right? And once they fail, it's over. So in terms of whatever the Palestinian question ends up yielding in terms of a result, whether that be, statehood, which was the idea in the 90s, or whether it be a territory, or whether it be a territory that's controlled by somebody else, another nation takes responsibility for them. I think that that we should be open to all possible options, and we should allow Israel to dictate what it is that it wants and needs. And I'm not a trained diplomat, and I'm not a trained military tacticianer. Although I can tell you that at Kiddush, after religious services, I feel like I meet 1,000 professional diplomats and military tacticianers who tell me exactly what should be done to solve the problem. And I think that there are a lot of professional experts in Israel that wake up every single morning, and that devote their lives to trying to create 5, 10, 15% more peace. And I think that that's kind of how we have to look at it right now. I don't know if there's ever going to be a day where we say peace has been brought to the region, conflict is over. The question is, can it be 5% safer for Jewish children living in Sderot? Can it
I appreciate that reframe. That's wonderful. Yeah.
And that's where I think we should all be looking now. Now, if you ask me, just to go back to your original question, why is it that the liberal denominations feel more vested in the Palestinian narrative? I think that is a result, as I talk about in the book, of a disproportionate prioritization of tikkun olam as universalist social justice. So that has been a kind of rallying cry of liberal Judaism for the last 20 to 30 years. And the reason I know it is because I grew up during that era. And when we say to ourselves, well, what about these Jewish kids that are going to these, Hamas Passover Seders, or whatever absurd ritual that they invent to express kind of their virtue signaling that they should be somehow admitted to the library when other Jews on campus are not admitted to the library. I think that we should all acknowledge that all of these people, basically, this Jewish population between the ages of, let's say, 25 or 20 to 25 to 35 or so, this is a small slice of the Jewish population. Something went drastically wrong in their upbringing. I'm not talking about their parents, their families, whatever. I know many who are phenomenal, devoted. Something went wrong in the way that Judaism was presented to them, in the way that their family is under attack. There's a family crisis. And they associate more with the attacker rather than their family member who is suffering as a result. So if any of us, just to make an analogy, if any of us had a family member who was, God forbid, hit in a drunk driving accident. Okay? Hit in a drunk driving accident. And our kid's reaction was, I really feel bad for the drunk driver. It would give all of us pause to kind of recalibrate in our minds how it is that we got to this point, what we had missed along the way for our kids, that our kids, and rather than their first reaction being, I can't believe that mom, dad, uncle, aunt, grandma, grandpa is in the hospital, this horrible thing happened, how do I help? But rather immediately switch to caring for the other ahead of family. That's a misfire, and that's a failure on our part as Jewish leadership. And so that within the pie of Jewish values that we teach, within the pie, Tikkun Olam can stay in the pie, but the
Tikkun Olam, by the way, is healing the world, basically fixing the world. Yeah,
fixing the world, which has been interpreted recently as social justice. That kind of universalist social justice that says that we should feed the hungry, right? We should help house the unhoused. That kind of social justice that strips away Jewish particularism for the sake of the universalist aspirational dream. That took too large front and center of a spotlight. And that needs to then be put back in check. That's part of my argument that Jewish peoplehood actually should be our main priority. And from peoplehood, we can get to any number of these, including feeding the hungry, and housing the unhoused.
I know we have 9 minutes left, and I want to make sure I get to some questions that we're getting, but I want to have, and Moshe will read that one that we have, but actually, Moshe, why don't we go ahead with the question, and then I want to end with my questions around what the Jews and non-Jews can do. So why don't you go ahead,
Sure.
Moshe?
So, Rabbi, the question I would have is, you mentioned the Palestinian narrative and how these people are buying into the Palestinian narrative. My question is, post 10/7, what is the Palestinian narrative now? I would think that it's the Hamas narrative, because Fatah and the rest haven't exactly stood up and said that we disagree with Hamas. So, in today's world, what is the Palestinian narrative?
So I really believe this, Moshe, and I mean it sincerely. I'm not trying to avoid the question. I don't think it's up to Jewish people to determine the Palestinian narrative. It's up to the Palestinians to determine their narrative.
I completely agree with you.
It's up to the Palestinians to determine their choices. They've made a series of choices that have led them to this point. They're responsible for their choices. I think objectively, anybody can look at the series of choices they've made and said this has led them to a horrible, horrible place. And so I think that it will be up to them to make the right decisions to move away. And I don't think that we can solve their problems. I think that we need to try to solve our own problems. And so nobody's going to come solve our problems. The savior that the Jewish people is looking for is the Jewish people. And so when we say, how will they pivot in this moment? The answer, in all honesty, is I'm not sure. I'm not sure how they pivot. I'm not sure how one pivots away from this kind of dedication to celebrating everything horrible that's happened in the last 500 plus days. But I hope that we can pivot. I hope that we can pivot and open our eyes and understand what we have to do in order to build a safe and secure Jewish tomorrow for all of us.
Amen.
Perfect segue to the next question, which is, and you talk about this in the book, but just for our listeners and folks who have not picked up this concise yet powerful read, what steps do you suggest for Jews to strengthen their loyalty to Judaism in Israel while maintaining their American allegiance?
Right. So for a brief moment in the book, I talk about dual citizenship. And if anybody here on the call has the ability to get an apartment, a second home in Ra'anana or Herzliya or Tel Aviv or Baca and Jerusalem or any of the places that Americans live all throughout Israel, I think it's a wonderful idea. For most of us, that's not feasible. And so the question is, how do we move ourselves closer to Israel. I think that's through education and through practice, like anything else. If you want to become good at it, you have to practice. And so I think that Hebrew is absolutely crucial. I think visiting Israel and prioritizing visiting Israel and spending time there is crucial. So I often meet Jewish people who say, like, but Rabbi, visiting Israel is expensive. So we decided that we would go to Fiji, for 2 weeks. And I understand why someone wants to go to Fiji for 2 weeks. Trust me, because it's a wonderful vacation. It's an escape.
Is there a Chabad in Fiji?
There's a Chabad everywhere. If there's a life form, there's a Chabad.
Guaranteed.
Guaranteed. So the Israel is the opposite of vacation and escape, right? Israel is tapping into a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose. So that's the choice that we have to make with our time and our resources. And what I remind people is that every choice you make is noticed not only by yourselves and your families, your communities, your children. And so your children know if you choose to go to Maui instead of going to Israel. Your children know if you go to London instead of going to Israel, Australia instead of going to Israel, Japan instead of going to Israel. Israel is a choice in terms of how you want to deploy your resources and your time and your effort. And in the long term, if you want to draw people closer to Israel and those values, you have to actually spend time there. Learning the Hebrew language is important. Learning about the Jewish people is important. Learning about the culture is important. Watching Fauda on Netflix is important. All of it's important. All of them are crucial.
Also, Beauty Queen of Jerusalem.
That's our Beauty Queen of Jerusalem. But education and visiting Israel are the two most important.
And Tehran, I would say, is the third one. And Shtisel. I mean, there's a lot of good stuff now.
There's a lot of good stuff.
Okay, so given that our audience is mostly Zionist non-Jews.
Yeah. By the way, Zionist non-Jews never give me that response. Zionist non-Jews never tell me going to Israel is
right.
Is too expensive and too difficult.
They're there all the time.
When I meet Zionist non-Jews, they tell me, Rabbi, my kids have been to Israel 40 times. How many times have your kids? And I'm embarrassed that my kids have been there less than the Zionist non-Jews that I meet. But it's different. It's different.
So what can they do? So just to be very clear, and I just want to, this is important. By the way, Pastor Dave McGarrett on our board has been to Israel over 50 times.
Yeah.
Who's with us right now? So hi, Dave.
Hi, Pastor Dave. Thank you.
He has a wonderful podcast called The Rabbi and the Pastor.
I can't wait to be on that.
Like actually, that's a great idea.
Orgy in cars drinking coffee. It's like me and Pastor Dave and Jerry Seinfeld driving around and talking with each other.
Come on out. We'll make it happen.
Yeah. It's only 24 hours long. So I just want to be very clear. When you say dual loyalty, you are assuming Judaism includes Israel.
I'm including that. So I'm assuming that
or Zionism.
Zionism in Israel is the same. Zionism and Judaism is embedded and wrapped up in one another, and Christian Zionists are.
So what can they do? What can they do to be dually loyal, just like the Jews?
So the first thing they can do is when they wake up in the morning, rather than reading CNN or New York Times or whatever news media they're used to, they can read the Jerusalem Post. Okay, so the very first thing that they can do, you want to be connected to Israel. If you are a Christian Zionist, when you wake up in the morning, you can associate yourself. You can align yourself with the stories and the explanations of what's going on from the state of Israel. By the way, CBN, the Christian Broadcast Network, is a great resource in this regard. I have I've met with Eric Steckelbeck on occasion, and he does a great job of reporting. And there's a whole bunch of people over there that are fantastic. They do great stuff in terms of explaining the scenario, because I think that part of reorienting ourselves is understanding that the media is one of the fronts of this war that has to be fought. Okay, that the media spreads mistruths over and over again, and we have to not only do we have to fight it, but we have to not digest it. We have to not digest that toxicity. I also think that that learning Hebrew and learning the history of Israel is really important. And so the same book that I that I asked you to read, I would suggest out. So there's the case for dual loyalty, but there's also, Israel, a concise history of a nation reborn. There's all kinds of stories about Israel. There's the movie Exodus, and there's the television show Fauda, and the Beauty Queen of Jerusalem. To be associated with it in some way is not only for Jews. As I explain in the book, to tell me your position on Israel is to reveal to me, right, the virtue of your character.
Love it.
So if somebody tells me what they think about Israel, I understand what you think about our values. I understand what you think about this country. Just remember the George Washington and Chaim Solomon scenario. I understand that you see these people together, and if you stand against this idea that they stand together, that tells me everything I need to know about you, no matter what the religion you're from. No matter
It's
what the
interesting.
religion.
When we communicate, and we're going to wrap, when we communicate, we proudly talk about our Judeo-Christian values. And we have no problem doing that.
I have no problem doing it either.
Yeah.
I can also tell you that as I've traveled around this country and spoken at churches, mostly evangelical, I can tell you that the
A
Jews...
lot of LDS friends in the LDS community. Tommy Alquist is one of them. He's on our board.
And the LDS community, the Mormon community in Utah. My wife has a very close friend that lives in Salt Lake City. I can tell you that Christians in this country are different than Christians in Europe. Because the Christians, all four of my grandparents are survivors of the Shoah. We lived through the final explosion of Jew hatred and beginning of a new chapter, and I talk about it in the book. And the way that they spoke about Christians, and the way that I have experienced the kind of warm welcome and grace of the Christian communities around this country has been nothing short of really special and eye-opening, and certainly, been a wonderful experience. We're in the process of forging a real relationship with the church up the street, Bel Air Church, and through the horror of the past 500 days of war, through the fires, they came and they used our synagogue on the 2 Sundays that they were displaced during the fires, and we welcomed them, and they didn't know. They thought it was lunch. It was actually kiddush that we served them. But I have to tell you that it was phenomenal. To serve them and to show them the kind of grace and hospitality. And the pastor, he's a great guy, Drew Sims, and it was great.
I talk about belonging. I wrote a book about it, and I talk about hospitality is the number one thing that you need in order to eventually get to belonging. So I love that. We are at time. If anybody wants to find out more about you or pick up your book, what do they do?
Go to Amazon and type in The Case for Dual Loyalty, and maybe I'll get a chance to come out and visit Idaho in the next year or so, and get to meet all of the Idaho Israel Alliance in person.
Please do.
Before we close, I just want to express that today is a national day of mourning for the Jewish people. Today, the Bibas family laid to rest Shira, Ariel, and Kfir, a mother and a toddler and an infant. And for many of us, we woke up and watched the eulogy, Yarden Bibas's eulogy, early in the morning, and I was laying in bed crying, listening to it. And in our tradition, we offer the words of consolation. May God comfort the Bibas family amongst the rest of the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. May God comfort them, and may God comfort all of the grieving families, not only in Israel, but all who grieve for all of these atrocities.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Moshe. Moshe,
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I want to thank you both for having me. All right.
Thank you.
And
We'll send you the YouTube. You got to go. You're overseeing Sarah Shiva. Thank you, Moshe. You want to stick around and just tell people what's coming up? Thank you, Rabbi.
Absolutely.
Nolan.
Thank you so much, Rabbi.
Bye, everyone.
So thank you for joining us. This is the first of many episodes of Gem State to Holy Land. This is going to be a quarterly event, so we will have another one coming up in quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. Thank you for everybody that stuck around joining us for this event. It's super awesome. I'll be pushing it out to YouTube this evening, and so it'll be ready to go for your consumption and to send to your friends in the morning. Be sure to like, share, and comment on everything that we do, and we thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. Have a good night, everybody. Thank you, Moshe.
Gem State to Holy Land is a project of the Idaho Israel Alliance. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe on all of your favorite platforms. Thank you so much for joining us, and Shalom.